What a great morning of worship, great reminder about how important Jesus is in our lives. And let me just echo what Tommy said about Father's Day. We're really glad you're here for that. Obviously, it's an important day, maybe the most significantly important day in the whole calendar year, right? Maybe not. Make it as important as you want it to be. All right, Genesis 29, and a great little story. I was kidding with Tommy before the service. You know, when you do a preaching calendar for a year, it's easy on a lot of days to make whatever the day is relate to the sermon topic that you're preaching on. It doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And this summer, we committed to preach through Genesis, and we were able to line up a lot of it to fit. We got to Father's Day, and there was really no good way to do that. And so I'm not going to try to pretend that it's a specific Father's Day sermon. It probably has some good application. Now, I will tell you this. If you really want a Father's Day thought, we're going to talk about Jacob, who had 12 sons and one daughter. That's a pretty good Father's Day, right? Can you imagine all the presents he's going to get on that day, right? And so we're going to look at that. What we're actually going to learn, though, and this is I think is one of the things so important about this sermon, and one of the things I hope I can get across to you. You know, we have a tendency because of how we think. We're shaped by our worldview. We're shaped by our own cultural experience. It's a very natural thing. And you know, if you're raised in a conservative and traditional context, you have a tendency to value conservative and traditional ideals, and the things that you value, you put an over weight on, or an over expectation on. And what we're going to actually look at today is something that we all, if you're conservative and traditional at all, you value marriage and family, right? You say, hey, marriage and family is a great thing. Now the problem is, you can take that great thing, that traditional conservative value, great thing of marriage and family, and you can idealize it till it becomes a problem thing in your life, right? For example, let me give you this to get started. Some of you are here today and it's Father's Day and you don't have good memories about family, and I get that. There's empathy for me on that part. Some of you are here and you're not married, and that just kind of creates, you know, angst in your life, and I get it. I really do. I would never want to minimize that. See, here's the truth. It's always hard and can be devastating not to be married, right? Here's something that's always true. It's always hard and often devastating to be married. Right? Yeah, some of you are like, you know, I don't want to answer that one because my wife's looking at me. No, because here's the point. What we do is we put expectation on the way that life turns out. And when life doesn't turn out the way that we want it to turn out, or the way that we think it should turn out, then we really have to struggle. Some of you are that way. Some of you are that way about your marriage. Some of you are that way about your life. Some of you are that way about your children. Some of you are that way about your parents. And so you live with this inner frustration or this disappointment, and if you're not careful, that disappointment can turn into disillusionment. Disillusionment is what we would call misplaced hope. Misplaced hope is when you put an outside expectation on someone or something. In other words, you put an expectation on a circumstance or a person, and you think, if that person or that circumstances does what I think it's going to do, then I am going to find a deep sense of significance and connection in my life that is going to heal whatever wounds that I have. The story that we're going to look at today is actually a story that weaves, it's woven together by three different people who are all central to the story, all significant in the story. and they all have these outsized expectations that turn into disappointments. Now, let me explain it to you, and then I'll read you a little bit of the text. Jacob sees Rachel, who in his mind is the most beautiful woman he's ever seen in his life. And he thinks, man, if I can get her to be my wife, if I can get her to love me, that is going to heal the wounds in my life, because really everything I've gotten in my life, I've gotten by deception. I don't deserve anything that I've gotten in my life. And so really I'm a nobody, I'm nothing. But if I got married to her, as pretty as she is, that's going to do something for me that nothing else can do for me. That's Jacob's story. Leah is a pawn. In fact, she's the most sympathetic character in the story. And by the way, I think it's really important to say this, because I think preachers, myself included specifically, can sometimes, it's really hard in a 35-minute sermon to unpack everything that needs to be unpacked by story, right? And sometimes you can make fun of somebody in a sermon, maybe intentionally or unintentionally, and you don't really carry the full weight of it. Here's the problem with Leah. She is a pawn. Her dad uses her. In fact, her dad literally is thinking, if I don't figure out a way to get her married, if I don't trick Jacob into marrying her, this girl may never get married. She's going to be in my house. I'm going to be responsible for all my life. And so he passes her off, right, as Rachel. He pretends that she's Rachel. And we'll get into that in a moment. And then you have Rachel, who is the beautiful woman, who's thinking, man, if I could just have a child, my life would be complete. She actually says, give me children or else I die. If I don't have children, I'm going to die. Now, listen, that's an outsized expectation. By the way, I think it's a realistic desire, and good desires, good longings are legitimate, right? It's not that the longings and desires are not good, they are good. It's just that you can put an emphasis or an expectation on them that they fail to deliver. Now, let me read you this story. So you have Jacob. He's worked 7 years. On his wedding night, he thinks he's marrying Rachel. Genesis 29, verse 25. And let me read this here for you. And it came to pass that in the morning, behold, it was Leah. Derek Kidner, who wrote a commentary on Genesis, said the words, behold, it was Leah, are the very embodiment of anticlimax. This is a moment, a miniature of man's disillusion experienced from Eden onwards. In other words, you always think it's Rachel, and it always ends up Leah. Right? You buy a car, it's Rachel. No, it's Leah. You get a new house, it's Rachel. No, it ends up being Leah, right? It's always Leah. That's the point. It's always Leah. And you got to have a mechanism. You got to have a worldview. You got to have a way to deal with that kind of disappointment that sets in. And so he says, and Laban said, he said, what is this thou hast done? Did I not serve thee for Rachel? Wherefore thou hast beguiled or deceived me? And Laban said, it must not be done so in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. And so he works another 7 years for Rachel. So now he's married to Rachel and he's married to Leah. And when the Lord saw, verse 31, that Leah was hated, that's the commentators, the writer's opinion about what is happening. He opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And Leah conceived and bare a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, surely the Lord hath looked upon my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me. And she conceived again and bare a son, and said, because the Lord hath heard that I was hated, he hath therefore given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon. And she conceived again and bare a son, and said, now this time will my husband be joined unto me. Literally, he will become attracted to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name was called Levi. She conceived again and bare a son, and she said, now will I praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah and left barren. Go down to chapter 30, verse 1. And when Rachel saw that she bare Jacob no children. Rachel envied her sister and said unto Jacob, give me children or else I die. What's important to note here is that this is not a prayer, right? This is a complaint to her husband. She's putting a demand on him. She says, you give me children or I'm gonna die. And Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, am I in God's stead who hath withheld thee the fruit of the womb, from thee the fruit of the womb? In other words, you're asking for me something that only God can do. You're putting an expectation on me I cannot deliver. Go down to chapter 30, verse 22, and God remembered. That's a great Hebrew word. We're gonna come back to it. Remembered Rachel. And God hearkened to her and opened her womb. And she conceived and bare a son and said, God hath taken away my reproach. And she called his name Joseph and said, the Lord shall add to me another son. So all of us in life are gonna face disappointment. That disappointment is gonna come in many forms. Oftentimes it comes in the form of family and relationship. And this is a lesson on how to deal with that disappointment before it turns into disillusionment, and where to find hope, where to place your hope, where to shift your hope, so that you don't become a cynical, bitter, disillusioned person when marriage and family, the things that we value, the traditional values that we hold, are not enough. In other words, here's the reality. Every single one of us will carry wounds, and only looking to God can we find healing for the wounds of misplaced hope. Okay, that's the story. Now we're gonna have to take a little journey through these interwoven lives to learn about. First of all, let's talk about the nature of misplaced hope. When we talk about hope and expectation, we all have them. We're humans. It is part of the human experience. The difficulty is that the deep longings, the deep desires of the human heart become controlling desires. See, it's human to have hope, right? It's also human to turn those hopes into things that become outsized. And so these deep desires are tied to your heart or your emotional well-being. Proverbs 13, verse 12, one of my favorite verses. It's probably one of the most insightful counseling verses that you can ever use. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. When the desire comes, it is the tree of life. To have misplaced hope is to have heart sickness. To have misplaced hope is to have such sickness in your heart that you are absolutely devastated. It's not just a surface level disappointment, right? You know, surface level disappointment, you go to a restaurant, you order the food, it's not that good. You're like, right, that's not good. We're not talking about that kind of disappointment. We're talking about the kind of disappointment that turns into disillusionment and to heart sickness. The kind of disappointment that makes you feel like somebody's played a trick on you and they've pulled the rug out from underneath you and life is never gonna work out and you're never gonna be happy. Say, what is this kind of disappointment? Well, misplaced hope is when you look to someone or something to do for you what only God can do. Let me say that to you again. Misplaced hope looks to someone or something to do what only God can do. So on a surface level, I'm not gonna get too deep yet into this, but Jacob was looking to being married to Rachel as the most important issue in his life. Leah's thinking, man, if I could just get my husband to love me. Rachel's thinking, if I could just have children. And each of them had a deep longing in their life that they believed that those circumstances or those relationships would do something so profound in their life that all of a sudden life would be worth living to them. That's the key, worth living, right? See, none of us want to just survive in life. None of us just want to kind of make it through. What we really want is we want life to become fulfilling, to have meaning, purpose, significance. And what we do is we then attach that significance, meaning, and purpose to circumstances or things where we begin to think, hey, if I had that, or if I had that person or that relationship, or if I had that person's love, or if I had that person's affection, then my life would have a level of meaning and significance I'm not going to get anyplace else. Now, here's the problem. You got to get this. If you build your life, I want you to listen to me. If you build your life on someone or something, you will either become controlling, so you'll be difficult to deal with, or you will become emotionally dependent. You can't survive without that relationship with that person. Here's how that oftentimes gets manifest. You'll either live your life through your children, or you'll live your life by putting pressure on them to perform at a certain level that they can't live up to that expectation. And by the way, you can do the same thing to your spouse, right? You can put an expectation on them that they cannot possibly meet in your life, and so you live with this continual disappointment. And if you don't process it, it turns into disillusionment. So if that's one perspective of misplaced hope, here's another. Misplaced hope looks to someone or something to form the foundation of your self-worth. Because it's not just hope that you're dealing with, it's actually the way that you view yourself. Because what's underneath misplaced hope, it's true for Jacob, Leah, and Rachel, is you attach your identity and self-worth to that person or thing, and it becomes the foundation of the way that you view your life and the way that you view yourself. Let me just take Jacob and Rachel for a moment. I just want to do this quickly. See, remember, and Tommy did a great job last week. Remember, if you go back into Jacob and Esau with Isaac, Jacob knew who he was and what he was. And everything that he had in his life, he had gotten through deceit, right? He lied to his father to get the blessing. So deep down, Jacob, you have to put yourself in the story. You have to see deep down, here's what Jacob's struggling with. I'm not who everybody thinks I am. I'm not worthy, right? My dad doesn't love me because of me. He loves me because he thought I was Esau. But then he sees Rachel and he says, man, she'll be the cure for all the inner struggles I have in my life. She's so beautiful. If I get her, nobody can look at me and think I'm not worthy. If I get her, everybody can think, man, look at him, he got her. So he's attached his identity and self-worth to Rachel's beauty, and he's thinking, if I get her and her beauty, then I will, that relationship, that circumstance, that being married to her will give me a value. Now here's the problem. All of you do this. And when I say all of you, that means me too, right? Your identity is in your marriage, your children, your career, your money, your success, your popularity, your appearance. And the list goes on. In fact, your desire for relationship success in life and human flourishing are all legitimate desires. In fact, none of them is sinful. The problem is that we direct these desires at something that is too small to hold them. And you're setting yourself up for deep pain and disappointment. Let me see if I can quickly explain this to you. C.S. Lewis, one of the most profound essays he ever wrote was on hope. And it's one of my favorite kind of essays and thought processes. Lewis says, Lewis' idea was he believed joy existed, he believed happiness existed, and he knew those were real things. The problem was he didn't know where the source of joy was. By the way, that's why his own autobiography is Surprised by Joy, right? I mean, it's just such a great little analogy. And so Lewis thought maybe joy is in nature, joy is in mythology, joy is in literature, joy is in romantic love and relationships. And he gradually, as he became a more mature person, became a Christian and began to really think deeply about these things, he began to realize that he was not longing for those things In fact, this is what he did. He described those things as the scent of a flower that he could not see, or the echo of a tune that he had not yet heard. That's the basis for one of his most famous quotes, that heaven is that remote music you're born remembering. It's one of my favorite Lewis quotes. What Lewis is actually saying is that there's something out there that is so deeply transformative that if you get that, everything else takes care of itself. And what we end up doing is we end up chasing the scent of a flower, or the tune or the melody of a song that we know exists somewhere. And what he's saying is the thing that he was longing for was not in this world. And so if the thing that you're longing for, the thing that can only satisfy you deeply is not in this world, then you must be made for another world. You're made for the place where the flower is. You're made for the place where the song is. You're made for where God is. That's the only thing that's going to solve the misplaced hopes that you have in life. Okay, that's the nature of misplaced hope. Secondly, the problem of misplaced hope. Now, once you start, it's like this. Jacob's going down a rabbit hole. Leah's going to go down a rabbit hole. Rachel's going to go down a rabbit hole. Do you know what it is to go down a rabbit hole? You have a little problem, and that little problem becomes outsized. It begins to grow. It becomes bigger than you can even begin to handle. And so it creates this ongoing problem in your life where things begin to unravel. Two things about misplaced hope. First of all, misplaced hope puts unrealistic expectations on circumstances. Okay? In other words, you think if my circumstances change, then everything in my life gets better. And by the way, that's a real thing that people do, right? If I'm not happy in this marriage, then I got to get out of this marriage and get into that marriage. If I'm not happy in this job, I got to get out of this job and get into that job. If I'm not happy with these kids, I got to get other kids. If I'm not happy, right? If I'm not happy with this church, I go find another church. Right? That's what we do. Because we think, hey, we have this unrealistic expectation on circumstances, and they do that. By the way, here's a second thought. Misplaced hope not only puts unrealistic expectations on circumstances, it puts unrealistic expectations on people. On people. You begin to look to circumstances to define, and then you look to people. See, here's what's underneath misplaced hope. Here's what causes this to become a problem. When you have this misplaced hope and you think that people and circumstances are the solution, you begin to intensify and you begin to go after these things, and you begin to look to them to change the way that you feel. And it happens in Leah's life when she names her sons. It happens in Rachel's life where instead of going to God and saying to God, hey, I'm barren and I really want you to give me children, she goes to Jacob and she says, here's the problem in my life. You aren't giving me children. He's like, it's above my pay grade. I can't deliver that. I can't do that for you. Let me quickly just give you a view. This is a little bit of what I would call pastoral counseling. Some of you aren't living here. Fortunately, you've matured past it. Some of you haven't lived long enough to get here. Some of you are living in this moment. I want you to listen to me for a minute. When people and circumstances disappoint you, just like Jacob, Leah, and Rachel, it's very natural for you to start blaming. The first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna blame other people. Give me children or else I die. It's your fault, right? Jacob, Laban, you lied to me. Right? He's probably even bitter at Leah. You deceived me. You knew all along what was happening. Right? You blame others. Then you'll slip from blaming others to you blame yourself. What's wrong with me? And you'll slip into self-loathing. And when you slip into self-loathing, what you're actually doing is you're beginning to blame you for everything that goes on in your life, and you begin to get frustrated because you think, I'm never going to be worthy enough, I'm never going to be good enough, I'm never going to be pretty enough, I'm never going to be skinny enough, I'm never going to be whatever, and so you blame yourself. You get into self-loathing. And once you get to self-loathing, then you start blaming life, right? You become cynical. You know you're cynical when you actually have this kind of view. You look at somebody else's life and you say, I don't know why it works out for them and it doesn't work out for me, right? You think you're the only person that's been dealt an unfair, I guess probably that's not a good analogy for church, right? An unfair hand of it's not like we're playing poker, but you get the analogy, right? And you're disadvantaged, right? You compare yourself, that's what happens here. There's this comparison going on, envious. So you get this problem with life, you become cynical and bitter. And then here's the worst part of it, then you blame God. That's always the journey. You blame others, you blame yourself, you blame life, and then you blame God. And now you become bitter and resentful, and you become angry with God because you think he has somehow let you down. You're going to have to find a way to work through it. See, the problem with disillusionment is this. If you don't do something specific and intentional, it only gets worse. Your life just continues to come apart. In fact, what happens is, listen, here's the problem with disillusionment and disappointment in your life. If you do not deal with it, it will set off a bomb in your life that will harm you, and it'll harm everyone around you. Do you get that? Because think about what happens. If you want to, this is the first family of promise, and they do horrible things to each other for years and years and years and years. You say, what? Why? Because it all starts with this misplaced hope, right? It's putting hope in people and things and circumstances that can't deliver what only God can deliver. Now, here's the good news, right? That's the bad news. Here's the good news. Here's the good news. The resolution of misplaced hope. Now, there's a remarkable way that this story, in two places, in two very definitive ways, brings about a resolution. And by the way, every good story has a resolution. Every good sermon has a resolution. That means that there has to be a turning point. There has to be a breakthrough, a shift where your view of what you're dealing with begins to change. It doesn't mean, listen carefully, it doesn't mean that your circumstances will automatically become what you hope them to be. I can't guarantee that, right? You may be living in a reality that's not going to change a lot. But here's the good news. You can be equipped by your relationship with God to deal with that reality in a way that you become a better person and you begin to experience better things in the circumstances that you're living in. In other words, God may not change your circumstances, but he may change you. And if he changes you, he can make you able to handle and deal with the circumstances. Two things. Number one, you see this in Leah's life. Look to the God who's worthy of praise. Now, in Genesis 32 through 35, Leah names her children. Reuben, his name means the Lord sees. And what she's actually doing, she's on a spiritual journey. She doesn't quite know it yet. She's saying, my husband has not seen me. The Lord sees me. Maybe now my husband will see me. If the Lord sees me, maybe my husband will see me. Then she names her second son, Simeon, and his name means the Lord heard. So maybe my husband will hear me. My husband hates me, but now maybe he'll hear me. Then Levi, his name means the Lord. God has not left me alone. Now maybe my husband will cleave to me or attach himself to me. Now, what's the most interesting thing here is that there's two primary words for the Lord that are used in the Old Testament. Elohim is the common, more general descriptive word for God, and it's most often used. Leah doesn't use that word. She uses the other name for God, which is Yahweh. The difference between Elohim and Yahweh would be if you said, God, there is a God who created the heaven and earth. The God who created the heaven and earth, that's Elohim. That's the God that we all know is powerful. The God Yahweh is the God who is personal. He's not a God who is far off, he's a God who is personal. And so when she begins to talk about God as Yahweh, what she is doing is she is looking to the God who is the God of the covenant promise. This represents her breakthrough. In fact, it culminates when she gets this fourth child, and the fourth child's name is Judah, and his name means the Lord be praised. Watch this. There's no mention at all of her husband. In fact, what's happened now is her husband is insignificant to the circumstantial issues of her life. In other words, her husband is not going to be the source of her own inner well-being or her self-worth or her expectations. What she's actually saying is, God, the God who makes promises and the God who keeps promises and the God who loves me in a way that nobody else can love me, that God can meet a need in my life that nobody else can meet. And now she's saying, I have what I need in my relationship with him. In fact, it's finally here that she takes all of her deepest and most passionate desires and moves them away from her relationship with Jacob and puts them on Jesus. If you really want to know what happens here, is she becomes, and by the way, you find her in the lineage of Jesus in the book of Matthew. She becomes a mother of Jesus. This is the girl that nobody wanted. This is the girl whose dad used her. This is the girl who's rejected by her husband. This is the girl that we would describe as the insignificant, the ugly one, the one that has no life. In fact, it's all a manufactured life. And all of a sudden, because she learns to put God at the very center of her life and she praises God, she gets her life back. She begins to live in a way that her husband and her father cannot control her. Do you know what praise does? Real praise to God is what frees you from the unhealthy relationships and the unhealthy influences in your life. Do you know why you so desperately need to be in church week after week after week after week and to sing? I mean to be participating and to be thinking. But do you know why you need to be in the Word of God in your life on such a regular, consistent basis? Do you know why you need preaching and teaching? Not because the preaching and teaching is good. You need it because you got to hear from God. Because if you don't, you will take the deep longings of the lived human experience and you'll put them on things and people that cannot deliver for you what only God can deliver. And you will be held in bondage. You'll become under the control of, and you'll be influenced in such an unhealthy way. And the only way that you get free from deceit, power, control, and greed is to find in Jesus everything that you're looking for. And when you get that, right, you find the one thing, right, that's worthy of everything in your life, okay? Then secondly, not only do you look to the God who's worthy to be praised, but you look to the God who remembers. Now, go down to Genesis 30, verse 22. We looked at Leah for a second. Now let's look at Rachel. This is such a great truth. It's almost impossible for me to unpack this for you, but let me try. Remembered in the Old Testament is a covenantal word. God doesn't remember because he sees something in you. And it's like, it's not like, hey, God looks at you and he says, oh, They learned a lesson, now I'm going to do this for them. That's not what the word means. It means that God keeps his promises. It is God responding to a promise that he has made in the past. So when it says God remembers, he is the God who keeps his word. He's the God who fulfills his promises. He's the God who never forgets. Now, he does not remember her because of what she has done. In other words, he doesn't wake up one day and say, oh yeah, there she is. She deserves this. I'm going to give her a child. And I'm not saying this to minimize. I know the pain that you can experience in this room. I'm not trying to minimize that. I'm just saying to you, if you have good things happen in your life, it's not because you deserve good things to happen to you. And if you haven't had good things happen in your life, it's not because you don't deserve those things to happen to you. That's the point. See, what you have with Leah and now you have with Rachel is they're both living inside the context of the covenant promise. See, there's two ways to live life. You live outside of the covenant or you live inside the covenant. If you live outside of the covenant, it's always going to be difficult and there's never any resolution to your hope. If you live inside of the covenant, it's actually guaranteed. Nothing can stop God's promises from coming true in your life. He does not remember because of what you have done. He does not remember because of what Rachel has done. He remembers because of what he alone has promised. The good news is that Rachel is not forgotten. You say, how is that possible? It's only possible because Jesus is the one who was truly forgotten. Not just overlooked in a household, not just overlooked in the family, not just an insignificant person. You see, he was forsaken by the Father at Calvary. He said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? See, Jesus was like David, right? The forgotten son. He was like Leah, the girl that nobody wanted. He was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. The Isaiah 53 experiences Leah's story written in advance about Jesus because Jesus experienced the ultimate cosmic misplaced forsakenness. By the way, not because his hope was misplaced, but because Jesus willingly, knowing the only way that you could have real hope is for his hope to be completely devastated, for his expectations to be completely unfulfilled. So he took your misplaced hope onto himself. He absorbed the full weight of divine abandonment so that every person who brings their longing to God in Jesus would not be met with silence, but with, I see you, I hear you, I know you, I attach myself to you, I remember you, I cannot possibly forget you. You are not forgotten by God. Jesus was forsaken so that you would be found. He was the boy that was forgotten and the girl that nobody wanted so that you, who have no claim on being remembered, could always be remembered. See, the God who opened Leah's womb and remembered Rachel acted definitively and finally in Jesus on the cross. You see, there are Leahs and Rachels and Jacobs in this room today. You're living with profound disappointment in your life, a misplaced hope that is robbing you of joy and peace. Some of you, like Rachel or like Leah, you have been faithful, you have been present, you've done what you're always supposed to do, and you still feel unseen and unloved. You feel like there's been no reward at all, no acknowledgement of all of who you are and what you've done. And I'm saying to you, God has not forgotten you. He remembers you. Some of you are like Rachel. You've been waiting for something real and good to come in your life, and it has not come. And you say, well, wait a minute. Do I look for a circumstance? Do not look for a change in circumstance. Look for the reality of Jesus to break through in your life. This is the Jonathan Edwards, right? See, if you only find God useful, you're always going to be disappointed. It's when you find him beautiful, right? Edwards said, a religious person finds God useful, a Christian finds God beautiful. Stop looking to people to do things for you that only God can do. And see God as worthy to be praised in your life. And some of you have reached for someone or something that you thought would meet the deepest need in your life. And then morning came and you were disappointed. Now here's what you got to see. These are not the end. These are mile markers. They're road signs. They're places on the map that don't point you away from, they point you to God. They're reminders that if you would just bring your deepest longings to God, to the God who was forsaken for you, to the God that was forgotten, so that you would never be forgotten, that you would always be remembered. And if you would reach out, not for Leah, not for Rachel, not for Jacob, but you'd reach out to the Son of God who's worthy to be praised, the Son of God who was forgotten so that you would be remembered, you would find that the deep wounds of your life, the deep hurts in your life would find healing. And the only place you'll get them in Jesus Christ. Let's stand together for prayer. Our heads are bowed, eyes are closed. Some of you are living in that misplaced hope. You have heart sickness. And maybe it's a heart sickness that you can't even verbalize. You would never want to verbalize it with somebody, and I get that. These altars are open, and really, here's what I would encourage you to do. Find a way to begin to praise God for who he is and what he's done and how he's remembered you. And shift your hope and expectation on him. Some of you today are living outside of the covenant. And you keep thinking, if I could just get God to do this, to fix this for me, my life would be what I want it to be. The only way your life is gonna be what it want to be is for you to get inside the covenant and know that there's a God who's for you, a God who remembers you, a God who keeps his promises to you, and that ultimately someday the great longings and satisfactions that you're looking for in your life are gonna be found and met completely and finally and totally and freely in Jesus Christ in heaven. That's what you're looking for, a relationship with him. And give your heart to him today. Let's pray together. Father, speak to our hearts. Cause us, Lord, to think about how easy it is as fallen humans to be disappointed, to be disillusioned, to be heartsick. And part of that is we know that there is a scent that says there's a flower. There's a tune that says there is a song. We know there's something more out there. And we know that those things ultimately point us to Jesus. I pray that we'd find him, and not just find him, but be found of him. That you'd completely change and recalibrate the inner hopes and desires of our life, that we may put them on Jesus. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.